Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. Chapter 33. Flower of warriors, how is't with Titus Lartius? Marcius. As with a man busied about decrees, condemning some to death and some to exile, ransoming him or pitying, threatening the other. Coriolanus. The captive Abbot's features and manners exhibited a whimsical mixture of offended pride and deranged foppery and bodily terror. "Why, how now, my masters?" said he, with a voice in which all three emotions were blended. "What order is this among ye? Be ye Turks or Christians, that handle a churchman? Know ye what it is? Manus imponere in servos Domini? Ye have plundered my mails, torn my cope of curious cut lace, which might have served a cardinal. Another in my place would have been at his excommunicabo vos. But I am placible, and if ye order forth my palfreys, release my brethren, and restore my mails, tell down with all speed 100 crowns to be expended in masses at the high altar of Jorvaulx Abbey, and make your vow to eat no venison until next Pentecost, it may be you shall hear little more of this mad frolic." "Holy father," said the chief outlaw, "it grieves me to think that you have met with such usage from any of my followers, as calls for your fatherly reprehension." "Usage!" echoed the priest, encouraged by the mild tone of the sylvan leader. "It were usage fit for no hound of good race; much less for a Christian, far less for a priest; and least of all for the Prior of the holy community of Jorvaulx. Here is a profane and drunken minstrel, called Allan a Dale, nebulo quidam, who has menaced me with corporal punishment; nay, with death itself, an I not pay down 400 crowns of ransom, to the boot of all the treasure he hath already robbed me of; gold chains and gimmal rings to an unknown value, besides what is broken and spoiled among their rude hands, such as my pouncer box and silver crisping tongs." "It is impossible that Allan a Dale can have thus treated a man of your reverend bearing," replied the Captain. "It is true as the Gospel of Saint Nicodemus," said the Prior; "he swore, with many a cruel north country oath, that he would hang me up on the highest tree of the greenwood." "Did he so in very deed? Nay, then, reverend father, I think you had better comply with his demands; for Allan a Dale is the very man to abide by his word when he has so pledged it." "You do but jest with me," said the astounded Prior, with a forced laugh; "and I love the good jest with all my heart; but, ha, ha, ha! when the mirth has lasted the livelong night, it is time to be grave in the morning." "And I am as grave as a father confessor," replied the Outlaw. "You must pay a round ransom, Sir Prior, or your convent is likely to be called to a new election; for your place will know you no more." "Are ye Christians," said the Prior, "and hold this language to a churchman?" "Christians? Ay, marry are we, and have divinity among us to boot," answered the Outlaw. "Let our buxom chaplain stand forth, and expound to this reverend father the texts which concern this matter." The Friar, half drunk, half sober, had huddled a friar's frock over his green cassock, and now summoning together whatever scraps of learning he had acquired by rote in former days, "Holy father," said he, "Deus faciat salvum benignitatem vestram, you are welcome to the greenwood." "What profane mummery is this?" said the Prior. "Friend, if thou be'st indeed of the Church, it were a better deed to show me how I may escape from these men's hands, than to stand ducking and grinning here like a morris dancer." "Truly, reverend father," said the Friar, "I know but one mode in which thou mayst escape. This is Saint Andrew's Day with us; we are taking our tithes." "But not of the Church, then, I trust, my good brother?" said the Prior. "Of Church and lay," said the Friar; "and therefore, Sir Prior, facite vobis amicos de mammone incitatis. Make yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, for no other friendship is like to serve your turn." "I love a jolly woodsman at heart," said the Prior, softening his tone. "Come, ye must not deal too hard with me. I can well of woodcraft, and can wind a horn clear and lustily, and hollo till every oak rings again. Come, ye must not deal too hard with me." "Give him a horn," said the Outlaw; "we will prove the skill he boasts of." The Prior Aymer winded a blast accordingly. The Captain shook his head. "Sir Prior," he said, "thou blowest a merry note, but it may not ransom thee. We cannot afford, as the legend on a good knight's shield hath it, to set thee free for a blast. Moreover, I have found thee, thou art one of those who, with new French graces and tra li ras, disturb the ancient English bugle notes." Prior, that last flourish on the recheat hath added 50 crowns to thy ransom, for corrupting the true old manly blasts of venery." "Well, friend," said the Abbot, peevishly, "thou art ill to please with thy woodcraft. I pray thee be more conformable in this matter of my ransom. At a word, since I must needs, for once, hold a candle to the devil, what ransom am I to pay for walking on Watling Street without having 50 men at my back?" "Were it not well," said the lieutenant of the gang apart to the Captain, "that the Prior should name the Jew's ransom, and the Jew name the Prior's?" "Thou art a mad knave," said the Captain, "but thy plan transcends. Here, Jew, step forth—look at that holy Father Aymer, Prior of the rich Abbey of Jorvaulx, and tell us at what ransom we should hold him. Thou knowest the income of his convent, I warrant thee." "O, assuredly," said Isaac. "I have trafficked with the good fathers, and bought wheat and barley, and fruits of the earth, and also much wool. O, it is a rich abbey stead, and they do live upon the fat, and drink the sweet wines upon the lees, these good fathers of Jorvaulx. Ah, if an outcast like me had such a home to go to, and such incomings by the year and by the month, I would pay much gold and silver to redeem my captivity." "Hound of a Jew!" exclaimed the Prior, "no one knows better than thy own cursed self, that our holy house of God is indebted for the finishing of our chancel—" "And for the storing of your cellars in the last season with the due allowance of Gascon wine," interrupted the Jew; "but that is small matters." "Hear the infidel dog!" said the churchman; "he jangles as if our holy community did come under debts for the wines we have a license to drink, propter necessitatem et ad frigus depellendum. The circumcised villain blasphemeth the holy Church, and Christian men listen and rebuke him not." "All this helps nothing," said the leader. "Isaac, pronounce what he may pay, without flaying both hide and hair." "And 600 crowns," said Isaac, "the good Prior might well pay to your honoured valours, and never sit less soft in his stall." "600 crowns," said the leader, gravely. "I am contented—thou hast well spoken, Isaac. 600 crowns. It is a sentence, Sir Prior." "A sentence! a sentence!" exclaimed the band. "Solomon had not done it better." "Thou hearest thy doom, Prior," said the leader. "Ye are mad, my masters," said the Prior. "Where am I to find such a sum? If I sell the very pyx and candlesticks on the altar at Jorvaulx, I shall scarce raise the half; and it will be necessary for that purpose that I go to Jorvaulx myself; ye may retain as barrows my 2 priests." "That will be but blind trust," said the Outlaw; "we will retain thee, Prior, and send them to fetch thy ransom. Thou shalt not want a cup of wine and collop of venison the while; and if thou lovest woodcraft, thou shalt see such as your north country never witnessed." "Or, if so please you," said Isaac, willing to curry a favour with the outlaws, "I can send to York for the 600 crowns, out of certain moneys in my hands, if so be that the most reverend Prior present will grant me acquittance." "He shall grant thee whatever thou dost list, Isaac," said the Captain; "and thou shalt lay down the redemption money for Prior Aymer as well as for thyself." "For myself! Ah, courageous sirs," said the Jew, "I am a broken and impoverished man. A beggar's staff must be my portion through life, supposing I were to pay you 50 crowns." "The Prior shall judge of that matter," replied the Captain. "How say you, Father Aymer, can the Jew afford a good ransom?" "Can he afford a ransom?" answered the Prior; "is he not the Isaac of York, rich enough to redeem the captivity of the 10 tribes of Israel, who were led into Assyrian bondage? I have seen but little of him myself, but our cellarer and treasurer have dealt largely with him, and report says that his house at York is so full of gold and silver as is a shame in any Christian land. Marvel it is to all living Christian hearts that such gnawing adders should be suffered to eat into the bowels of the state, and even of the Holy Church itself, with foul usuries and extortions." "Hold, father," said the Jew, "mitigate and assuage your choler. I pray for your reverence to remember that I force my moneys upon no one; but when churchman and layman, prince and prior, knight and priest, come knocking to Isaac's door, they borrow not his shekels with these uncivil terms. It is then, 'Friend Isaac, will you pleasure us in this matter, and our day shall be truly kept, so God say me;' and, 'Kind Isaac, if ever you served man, show yourself a friend in this need;' and when the day comes, and I ask my own, then what hear I but damned Jew, and 'the curse of Egypt on your tribe,' and all that may stir up the rude and uncivil populace against poor strangers?" "Prior," said the Captain, Jew though he be, he hath in this spoken well. Do thou, therefore, name his ransom, as he named thine, without further rude terms." "None but latro famosus, the interpretation whereof," said the Prior, "will I give at some other time and tide, would place a Christian prelate and an unbaptized Jew upon the same bench. But since ye require me to put a price upon this caitiff, I tell you openly that ye will wrong yourselves if you take from him a penny under 1,000 crowns." "A sentence! a sentence!" exclaimed the chief Outlaw. "A sentence! a sentence!" shouted his assessors. "The Christian has shown his good nurture, and dealt with us more generously than the Jew." "The God of my fathers help me!" said the Jew. "Will ye bear to the ground an impoverished creature? I am this day childless, and will ye deprive me of the means of livelihood?" "Thou wilt have the less to provide for, Jew, if thou art childless," said Aymer. "Alas, my lord," said Isaac, "your law permits you not to know how the child of our bosom is entwined with the strings of our heart. O Rebecca, laughter of my beloved Rachel! were each leaf of that tree a zecchin, and each zecchin mine own, all that mass of wealth would I give to know whether thou art alive, and escaped the hands of the Nazarene." "Was not thy daughter dark-haired?" said one of the outlaws, "and wore she not a veil of twisted sendal, embroidered with silver?" "She did, she did," said the old man, trembling with eagerness, as formerly with fear. "The blessing of Jacob be upon thee! Canst thou tell me aught of her safety?" "It was she, then," said the yeoman, "who was carried off by the proud Templar, when he broke through our ranks on yester even. I had drawn my bow to send a shaft after him, but spared him even for the sake of the damsel, who I feared might take harm from the arrow." "Oh!" answered the Jew, "I would to God thou hadst shot, though the arrow had pierced her bosom. Better the tomb of her fathers than the dishonourable couch of the licentious and savage Templar. Ichabod! Ichabod! the glory hath departed from my house." "Friends," said the chief, looking around, "the old man is but a Jew, natheless his grief touches me. Deal uprightly with us, Isaac. Will paying this ransom of 1,000 crowns leave thee altogether penniless?" Isaac, recalled to think of his worldly goods, the love of which, by dint of inveterate habit, contended even with his parental affection, grew pale, stammered, and could not deny there might be some small surplus. "Well, go to, what though there be," said the Outlaw. "We will not reckon with thee too closely. Without treasure thou mayest as well hope to redeem thy child from the clutches of Sir Brian de Bois Guilbert, as to shoot a stag royal with a headless shaft. We will take thee with the same ransom with Prior Aymer, or rather at 100 crowns lower, which 100 crowns shall be mine own peculiar loss, and not light upon this worshipful community; and so we shall avoid the heinous offence of rating a Jew merchant as high as a Christian prelate, and thou wilt have 600 crowns remaining to treat for thy daughter's ransom. Templars love the glitter of silver shekels as well as the sparkle of black eyes. Hasten to make thy crowns chink in the ear of de Bois Guilbert, ere worse comes of it. Thou wilt find him, as our scouts have brought notice, at the next preceptory house of his order. Said I well, my merry mates?" The yeomen expressed their wonted acquiescence in their leader's opinion, and Isaac, relieved of one half of his apprehensions, by learning that his daughter lived, and might possibly be ransomed, threw himself at the feet of the generous Outlaw, and, rubbing his beard against his buckskins, sought to kiss the hem of his green cassock. The Captain drew himself back, and extricated himself from the Jew's grasp, not without some marks of contempt. "Nay, beshrew thee, man, up with thee! I am English born, and love no such Eastern prostrations. Kneel to God, and not to a poor sinner like me." "Ay, Jew," said Prior Aymer, "kneel to God, as represented in the servant of his altar, and who knows, with thy sincere repentance and due gifts to the shrine of Saint Robert, what grace thou mayst acquire for thyself and thy daughter Rebecca? I grieve for the maiden, for she is of fair and comely countenance. I beheld her in the lists of Ashby. Also, Brian de Bois Guilbert is one with whom I may do much. Bethink thee how thou mayst deserve my good word with him." "Alas! alas!" said the Jew, "on every hand the spoilers arise against me. I am given as a prey unto the Assyrian, and a prey unto him of Egypt." "And what else should be the lot of thy accursed race?" answered the Prior. "For what saith Holy Writ, Verbum Domini projocerunt, et sapientia est nulla in eis. They have cast forth the word of the Lord, and there is no wisdom in them. Propterea dabo mulieris eorum exteris. I will give their women to strangers, that is to the Templar, as in the present matter, et thesaurus eorum heredibus alienis, and their treasures to others, as in the present case to these honest gentlemen." Isaac groaned deeply, and began to wring his hands, and to relapse into his state of desolation and despair; but the leader of the yeomen led him aside. "Advise thee well, Isaac," said Locksley, "what thou wilt do in this matter. My counsel to thee is to make a friend of this churchman. He is vain, Isaac, and he is covetous, at least he needs money to supply his profusion. Thou canst easily gratify his greed, for think not that I am blinded by thy pretexts of poverty. I am intimately acquainted, Isaac, with the very iron chest in which thou dost keep thy money bags. What! know I not the great stone beneath the apple tree that leads into the vaulted chamber under thy garden at York?" The Jew grew pale as death. "But fear nothing from me," continued the yeoman, "for we are of old acquainted. Dost thou not remember the sick yeoman whom thy fair daughter Rebecca redeemed from the gyves at York, and kept him in thy house till his health was restored, when thou didst dismiss him recovered, and with a piece of money? Usurer as thou art, thou didst never place coin at better interest than that poor silver mark, for it has this day saved thee 500 crowns." "And thou art he whom we called Diccon Ben the Bow?" said Isaac. "I thought ever I knew the accent of thy voice." "I am Ben the Bow," said the Captain, "and Locksley, and have a good name besides all these." "But thou art mistaken, good Ben the Bow, concerning that same vaulted apartment. So help me Heaven, as there is not in it but some merchandises which I will gladly part with to you. 100 yards of Lincoln green to make doublets to thy men, and 100 staves of Spanish yew to make bows, and 100 silken bowstrings, tough, round, and sound, these I will send thee for thy good will, honest Diccon, and thou wilt keep silence about the vault, my good Diccon." "Silent as a dormouse," said the Outlaw, "and never trust me but I am grieved for thy daughter. But I may not help it. The Templars' lances are too strong for my archery in the open field; they would scatter us like dust. Had I but known it was Rebecca when she was borne off, something might have been done. But now thou must needs proceed by policy. Come, shall I treat for thee with the Prior?" "In God's name, Diccon, an thou canst, aid me to recover the child of my bosom." "Do not thou interrupt me with thine ill-timed avarice," said the Outlaw, "and I will deal with him in thy behalf." He then turned from the Jew, who followed him, however, as closely as his shadow. "Prior Aymer," said the Captain, "come apart with me under this tree. Men say thou dost love wine, and a lady's smile, better than beseems thy Order, Sir Priest, but with that I have naught to do. I have heard, too, thou dost love a brace of good dogs, and a fleet horse, and it may well be that, loving things which are costly to come by, thou hatest not a purse of gold. But I have never heard that thou didst love oppression or cruelty. Now, here is Isaac willing to give thee the means of pleasure and pastime in a bag containing 100 marks of silver, if thy intercession with thine ally the Templar shall avail to procure the freedom of his daughter." "In safety and honour, as when taken from me," said the Jew, "otherwise it is no bargain." "Peace, Isaac," said the Outlaw, "or I give up thine interest. What say you to this my purpose, Prior Aymer?" "The matter," quoth the Prior, "is of a mixed condition; for, if I do a good deal on the one hand, yet, on the other, it goeth to the vantage of a Jew, and in so much is against my conscience. Yet, if the Israelite will advantage the Church by giving me somewhat over to the building of our door-tour, I will take it on my conscience to aid him in the matter of his daughter." "For a score of marks to the door-tour," said the Outlaw, "be still, I say, Isaac, or for a brace of silver candlesticks to the altar, we will not stand with you." "Nay, but, good Diccon Ben the Bow," said Isaac, endeavouring to interpose. "Good Jew, good beast, good earthworm," said the yeoman, losing patience, "an thou dost go on to put thy filthy lucre in the balance with thy daughter's life and honour, by Heaven, I will strip thee of every maravetti thou hast in the world, before 3 days are out." Isaac shrunk together, and was silent. "And what pledge am I to have for all this?" said the Prior. "When Isaac returns successful through your mediation," said the Outlaw, "I swear by Saint Hubert, I will see that he pays thee the money in good silver, or I will reckon with him for it in such sort, he had better have paid 20 such sums." "Well then, Jew," said Aymer, "since I must needs meddle in this matter, let me have the use of thy writing tablets—though, hold, rather than use thy pen, I would fast for 24 hours, and where shall I find one?" "If your holy scruples can dispense with using the Jew's tablets, for the pen I can find a remedy," said the yeoman; and bending his bow, he aimed his shaft at a wild goose which was soaring over their heads, the advanced guard of a phalanx of his tribe, which were winging their way to the distant and solitary fens of Holderness. The bird came fluttering down, transfixed with the arrow. "There, Prior," said the Captain, "are quills enow to supply all the monks of Jorvaulx for the next 100 years, an they take not to writing chronicles." The Prior sat down, and at great leisure indited an epistle to Brian de Bois Guilbert, and having carefully sealed up the tablets, delivered them to the Jew, saying, "This will be thy safe conduct to the Preceptory of Templestowe, and, as I think, is most likely to accomplish the delivery of thy daughter, if it be well backed with proffers of advantage and commodity at thine own hand; for, trust me well, the good Knight Bois Guilbert is of their confraternity that do naught for naught." "Well, Prior," said the Outlaw, "I will detain thee no longer here than to give the Jew a quittance for the 600 crowns at which thy ransom is fixed. I accept of him for my paymaster; and if I hear that ye boggle at allowing him in his accompts the sum so paid by him, Saint Mary refuse me, and I burn not the Abbey over thine head, though I hang 10 years the sooner." With a much worse grace than that therewith he had penned the letter to Bois Guilbert, the Prior wrote an acquittance, discharging Isaac of York of 600 crowns, advanced to him in his need for acquittal of his ransom, and faithfully promising to hold true compt with him for that sum. "And now," said Prior Aymer, "I will pray you of restitution of my mules and palfreys, and the freedom of the reverend brethren attending upon me, and also of the gymmal rings, jewels, and fair vestures, of which I have been despoiled, having now satisfied you for my ransom as a true prisoner." "Touching your brethren, Sir Prior," said Locksley, "they shall have present freedom; it were unjust to detain them. Touching your horses and mules, they shall also be restored, with such spending money as may enable you to reach York, for it were cruel to deprive you of the means of journeying. But as concerning rings, jewels, chains, and what else, you must understand that we are men of tender consciences, and will not yield to a venerable man like yourself, who should be dead to the vanities of this life, the strong temptation to break the rule of his foundation, by wearing rings, chains, or other vain gauds." "Think what you do, my masters," said the Prior, "ere you put your hand on the Church's patrimony. These things are inter res sacras, and I wot not what judgment might ensue, were they to be handled by laical hands." "I will take care of that, reverend Prior," said the Hermit of Copmanhurst, "for I will wear them myself." "Friend or brother," said the Prior, in answer to the solution of his doubts, "if thou hast really taken religious orders, I pray thee to look how thou wilt answer to thine official for the share thou hast taken in this day's work." "Friend Prior," returned the Hermit, "you are to know that I belong to a little diocese, where I am my own diocesan, and care as little for the Bishop of York as I do for the Abbot of Jorvaulx, the Prior, and all the convent." "Thou art utterly irregular," said the Prior; "one of those disorderly men, who, taking on them the sacred character without due cause, profane the holy rites, and endanger the souls of those who take counsel at their hands. Lapides pro pane condonates iis, giving them stones instead of bread, as the Vulgate hath it." "Nay," said the Friar, "an my brain pan could have been broken by Latin, it had not held so long together. I say, that easing a world of such misproud priests as thou art, of their jewels and their gimcracks, is a lawful spoiling of the Egyptians." "Thou beest a hedge priest," said the Prior, in great wrath, "excommunicabo vos." "Thou beest thyself more like a thief and a heretic," said the Friar, equally indignant. "I will pouch up no such affront before my parishioners, as thou thinkest it not shame to put upon me, although I be a reverend brother to thee. Ossa ejus perfringam, I will break your bones, as the Vulgate hath it." "Hola!" cried the Captain, "come the reverend brethren to such terms? Keep thine assurance of peace, Friar. Prior, an thou hast not made thy peace perfect with God, provoke the Friar no further. Hermit, let the reverend brother depart in peace, as a ransomed man." The yeomen separated the incensed priests, who continued to raise their voices, vituperating each other in bad Latin, which the Prior delivered the more fluently, and the Hermit with the greater vehemence. The Prior at length recollected himself sufficiently to be aware that he was compromising his dignity by squabbling with such a hedge priest as the Outlaw's chaplain, and being joined by his attendants, rode off with considerably less pomp, and in a much more apostolical condition, so far as worldly matters were concerned, than he had exhibited before this rencounter. It remained that the Jew should produce some security for the ransom which he was to pay on the Prior's account, as well as upon his own. He gave, accordingly, an order sealed with his signet, to the brother of his tribe at York, requiring him to pay to the bearer the sum of 1,000 crowns, and to deliver certain merchandises specified in the note. "My brother Shiva," he said, groaning deeply, "hath the key of my warehouses." "And of the vaulted chamber," whispered Locksley. "No, no, may Heaven forfend!" said Isaac. "Evil is the hour that let any one whomsoever into that secret." "It is safe with me," said the Outlaw, "so be that this thy scroll produce the sum therein nominated and set down. But what now, Isaac? Art dead? Art stupefied? Hath the payment of 1,000 crowns put thy daughter's peril out of thy mind?" The Jew started to his feet. "No, Diccon, no. I will presently set forth. Farewell, thou whom I may not call good, and dare not and will not call evil." Yet, ere Isaac departed, the Outlaw Chief bestowed on him this parting advice. "Be liberal of thine offers, Isaac, and spare not thy purse for thy daughter's safety. Credit me, that the gold thou shalt spare in her cause will hereafter give thee as much agony as if it were poured molten down thy throat." Isaac acquiesced with a deep groan, and set forth on his journey, accompanied by 2 tall foresters, who were to be his guides, and at the same time his guards, through the wood. The Black Knight, who had seen with no small interest these various proceedings, now took his leave of the Outlaw in turn; nor could he avoid expressing his surprise at having witnessed so much of civil policy amongst persons cast out from all the ordinary protection and influence of the laws. "Good fruit, Sir Knight," said the yeoman, "will sometimes grow on a sorry tree; and evil times are not always productive of evil alone and unmixed. Amongst those who are drawn into this lawless state, there are, doubtless, numbers who wish to exercise its license with some moderation, and some who regret, it may be, that they were obliged to follow such a trade at all." "And to one of those," said the Knight, "I am now, I presume, speaking?" "Sir Knight," said the Outlaw, "we have each our secret. You are welcome to form your judgment of me, and I may use my conjectures touching you, though neither of our shafts may hit the mark they are shot at. But as I do not pray to be admitted into your mystery, be not offended that I preserve my own." "I crave pardon, brave Outlaw," said the Knight; "your reproof is just. But it may be we shall meet hereafter with less of concealment on either side. Meanwhile, we part friends, do we not?" "There is my hand upon it," said Locksley, "and I will call it the hand of a true Englishman, though an outlaw for the present." "And there is mine in return," said the Knight, "and I hold it honoured by being clasped with yours. For he that does good, having the unlimited power to do evil, deserves praise not only for the good which he performs, but for the evil which he forbears. Fare thee well, gallant Outlaw." Thus parted that fair fellowship; and he of the Fetterlock, mounting upon his strong war-horse, rode off through the forest. CHAPTer 34. King John. I'll tell thee what, my friend, he is a very serpent in my way; and wheresoe'er this foot of mine doth tread, he lies before me. Dost thou understand me? King John. There was a brave feasting in the castle of York, to which Prince John had invited those nobles, prelates, and leaders, by whose assistance he hoped to carry through his ambitious projects upon his brother's throne. Waldemar Fitzurse, his able and politic agent, was at secret work among them, tempering them all to that pitch of courage which was necessary in making an open declaration of their purpose. But their enterprise was delayed by the absence of more than one main limb of the confederacy. The stubborn and daring, though brutal courage of Front de Bœuf, the buoyant spirits and bold daring of De Bracy, the sagacity, martial experience, and renowned valour of Brian de Bois Guilbert, were important to the success of their conspiracy; and, while cursing in secret their unnecessary and unmeaning absence, neither John nor his adviser dared to proceed without them. Isaac the Jew also seemed to have vanished, and with him the hope of certain sums of money, making up the subsidy for which Prince John had contracted with that Israelite and his brethren. This deficiency was likely to prove perilous in an emergency so critical. It was on the morning after the fall of Torquilstone, that a confused report began to spread abroad in the city of York that De Bracy and Bois Guilbert, with their confederate Front de Bœuf, had been taken or slain. Waldemar brought the rumour to Prince John, announcing, that he feared its truth the more that they had set out with a small attendance, for the purpose of committing an assault on the Saxon Cedric and his attendants. At another time the Prince would have treated this deed of violence as a good jest; but now, that it interfered with and impeded his own plans, he exclaimed against the perpetrators, and spoke of the broken laws, and the infringement of public order and of private property, in a tone which might have become King Alfred. "The unprincipled marauders," he said, "were I ever to become monarch of England, I would hang such transgressors over the drawbridges of their own castles." "But to become monarch of England," said his Ahithophel coolly, "it is necessary not only that your Grace should endure the transgressions of these unprincipled marauders, but that you should afford them your protection, notwithstanding your laudable zeal for the laws they are in the habit of infringing. We shall be finely helped, if the churl Saxons should have realized your Grace's vision, of converting feudal drawbridges into gibbets, and yonder bold-spirited Cedric seemeth one to whom such an imagination might occur. Your Grace is well aware it will be dangerous to stir without Front de Bœuf, De Bracy, and the Templar, and yet we have gone too far to recede with safety." Prince John struck his forehead with impatience, and then began to stride up and down the apartment. "The villains," he said, "the base treacherous villains, to desert me at this pinch!" "Nay, say rather the feather-pated giddy madmen," said Waldemar, "who must be toying with follies when such business was in hand." "What is to be done?" said the Prince, stopping short before Waldemar. "I know nothing which can be done," answered his counsellor, "save that which I have already taken order for. I came not to bewail this evil chance with your Grace, until I had done my best to remedy it." "Thou art ever my better angel, Waldemar," said the Prince, "and when I have such a Chancellor to advise withal, the reign of John will be renowned in our annals. What hast thou commanded?" "I have ordered Louis Winkelbrand, De Bracy's lieutenant, to cause his trumpet sound to horse, and to display his banner, and to set presently forth towards the castle of Front de Bœuf, to do what yet may be done for the succour of our friends." Prince John's face flushed with the pride of a spoilt child, who has undergone what it conceives to be an insult. "By the face of God," he said, "Waldemar Fitzurse, much hast thou taken upon thee! And over malapert thou wert to cause the trumpet to blow, or banner to be raised, in a town where ourselves were in presence, without our express command." "I crave your Grace's pardon," said Fitzurse, internally cursing the idle vanity of his patron; "but when time pressed, and even the loss of minutes might be fatal, I judged it best to take this much burden upon me, in a matter of such importance to your Grace's interest." "Thou art pardoned, Fitzurse," said the Prince gravely; "thy purpose hath atoned for thy hasty rashness. But whom have we here? De Bracy himself by the rood, and in strange guise doth he come before us." It was indeed De Bracy, bloody with spurring, fiery red with speed. His armour bore all the marks of the late obstinate fray, being broken, defaced, and stained with blood in many places, and covered with clay and dust from the crest to the spur. Undoing his helmet, he placed it on the table, and stood a moment as if to collect himself before he told his news. "De Bracy," said Prince John, "what means this? Speak, I charge thee. Are the Saxons in rebellion?" "Speak, De Bracy," said Fitzurse, almost at the same moment with his master. "Thou wert wont to be a man. Where's the Templar? Where's Front de Bœuf?" "The Templar is fled," said De Bracy. "Front de Bœuf you will never see more. He has found a red grave among the blazing rafters of his own castle, and I alone am escaped to tell you." "Cold news," said Waldemar, "to us, though you speak of fire and conflagration." "The worst news is not yet said," answered De Bracy, and coming up to Prince John, he uttered in a low and emphatic tone, "Richard is in England. I have seen and spoken with him." Prince John turned pale, tottered, and caught at the back of an oaken bench to support himself, much like to a man who receives an arrow in his bosom. "Thou ravest, De Bracy," said Fitzurse; "it cannot be." "It is as true as truth itself," said De Bracy. "I was his prisoner, and spoke with him." "With Richard Plantagenet, sayest thou?" continued Fitzurse. "With Richard Plantagenet," replied De Bracy, "with Richard Cœur de Lion, with Richard of England." "And thou wert his prisoner?" said Waldemar. He is then at the head of a power?" "No, only a few outlawed yeomen were around him, and to these his person is unknown. I heard him say he was about to depart from them. He joined them only to assist at the storming of Torquilstone." "Ay," said Fitzurse, "such is indeed the fashion of Richard, a true knight errant he, and will wander in wild adventure, trusting the prowess of his single arm, like any Sir Guy or Sir Bevis, while the weighty affairs of his kingdom slumber, and his own safety is endangered. What dost thou propose to do, De Bracy?" "I? I offered Richard the service of my free lances, and he refused them. I will lead them to Hull, seize on shipping, and embark for Flanders. Thanks to the bustling times, a man of action will always find employment. And thou, Waldemar, wilt thou take lance and shield, and lay down thy policies, and wend along with me, and share the fate which God sends us?" "I am too old, Maurice, and I have a daughter," answered Waldemar. "Give her to me, Fitzurse, and I will maintain her as fits her rank, with the help of lance and stirrup," said De Bracy. "Not so," answered Fitzurse. "I will take sanctuary in this church of Saint Peter; the Archbishop is my sworn brother." During this discourse, Prince John had gradually awakened from the stupor into which he had been thrown by the unexpected intelligence, and had been attentive to the conversation which passed betwixt his followers. "They fall off from me," he said to himself; "they hold no more by me than a withered leaf by the bough when a breeze blows on it. Hell and fiends! Can I shape no means for myself when I am deserted by these cravens?" He paused, and there was an expression of diabolical passion in the constrained laugh with which he at length broke in on their conversation. "Ha, ha, ha! My good lords, by the light of Our Lady's brow, I held ye sage men, bold men, ready-witted men; yet ye throw down wealth, honour, and pleasure, all that our noble game promised you, at the moment it might be won by one bold cast." "I understand you not," said De Bracy. "As soon as Richard's return is blown abroad, he will be at the head of an army, and all is then over with us. I would counsel you, my lord, either to fly to France, or take the protection of the Queen Mother." "I seek no safety for myself," said Prince John haughtily, "that I could secure by a word spoken to my brother. But although you, De Bracy, and you, Waldemar Fitzurse, are so ready to abandon me, I should not greatly delight to see your heads blackening on Clifford's gate yonder. Thinkest thou, Waldemar, that the wily Archbishop will not suffer thee to be taken from the very horns of the altar, would it make his peace with King Richard? And forgettest thou, De Bracy, that Robert Estoteville lies betwixt thee and Hull with all his forces, and that the Earl of Essex is gathering his followers? If we had reason to fear these levies even before Richard's return, trowest thou there is any doubt now which party their leaders will take? Trust me, Estoteville alone has strength enough to drive all thy free lances into the Humber." Waldemar Fitzurse and De Bracy looked in each other's faces with blank dismay. "There is but one road to safety," continued the Prince, and his brow grew black as midnight. "This object of our terror journeys alone; he must be met withal." "Not by me," said De Bracy hastily. "I was his prisoner, and he took me to mercy. I will not harm a feather in his crest." "Who spoke of harming him?" said Prince John, with a hardened laugh. "The knave will say next that I meant he should slay him. No, a prison were better; and whether in Britain or Austria, what matters it? Things will be but as they were when we commenced our enterprise. It was founded on the hope that Richard would remain a captive in Germany; our uncle Robert lived and died in the castle of Cardiff." "Ay, but," said Waldemar, "your sire Henry sate more firm in his seat than your Grace can. I say the best prison is that which is made by the sexton; no dungeon like a church vault. I have had my say." "Prison or tomb," said De Bracy, "I wash my hands of the whole matter." "Villain!" said Prince John, "thou wouldst not bewray our counsel?" "Counsel was never bewrayed by me," said De Bracy haughtily, "nor must the name of villain be coupled with mine." "Peace, Sir Knight," said Waldemar; "and you, good my lord, forgive the scruples of valiant De Bracy. I trust I shall soon remove them." "That passes your eloquence, Fitzurse," replied the knight. "Why, good Sir Maurice," rejoined the wily politician, "start not aside like a sacred steed, without, at least, considering the object of your terror. This Richard—but a day since, and it would have been thy dearest wish to have met him hand to hand in the ranks of battle, 100 times I have heard thee wish it." "Ay," said De Bracy, "but that was as thou sayest, hand to hand, and in the ranks of battle. Thou never heardest me breathe a thought of assaulting him alone, and in a forest." "Thou art no good knight if thou dost scruple at it," said Waldemar. "Was it in battle that Launcelot de Lake and Sir Tristram won renown? Or was it not by encountering gigantic knights under the shade of deep and unknown forests?" "Ay, but I promise you," said De Bracy, "that neither Tristram nor Launcelot would have been match, hand to hand, for Richard Plantagenet, and I think it was not their wont to take odds against a single man." "Thou art mad, De Bracy. What is it we propose to thee, a hired and retained captain of Free Companions, whose swords are purchased for Prince John's service? Thou art apprized of our enemy, and then thou scruplest, though thy patron's fortunes, those of thy comrades, thine own, and the life and honour of every one amongst us, be at stake." "I tell you," said De Bracy, sullenly, "that he gave me my life. True, he sent me from his presence, and refused my homage; so far I owe him neither favour nor allegiance, but I will not lift hand against him." "It needs not. Send Louis Winkelbrand and a score of thy lances." "Ye have sufficient ruffians of your own," said De Bracy; "not one of mine shall budge on such an errand." "Art thou so obstinate, De Bracy?" said Prince John; "and wilt thou forsake me, after so many protestations of zeal for my service?" "I mean it not," said De Bracy; "I will abide by you in aught that becomes a knight, whether in the lists or in the camp; but this highway practice comes not within my vow." "Come hither, Waldemar," said Prince John. "An unhappy prince am I. My father, King Henry, had faithful servants; he had but to say that he was plagued with a factious priest, and the blood of Thomas a Becket, saint though he was, stained the steps of his own altar. Tracy, Morville, Brito, loyal and daring subjects, your names, your spirit are extinct; and although Reginald Fitzurse hath left a son, he hath fallen off from his father's fidelity and courage." "He has fallen off from neither," said Waldemar Fitzurse; "and since it may not better be, I will take on me the conduct of this perilous enterprise. Dearly, however, did my father purchase the praise of a zealous friend; and yet did his proof of loyalty to Henry fall far short of what I am about to afford. For rather would I assail a whole calendar of saints than put spear in rest against Cœur de Lion. De Bracy, to thee I must trust to keep up the spirits of the doubtful, and to guard Prince John's person. If you receive such news as I trust to send you, our enterprise will no longer wear a doubtful aspect. Page," he said, "hie to my lodgings, and tell my armourer to be there in readiness; and bid Stephen Wetheral, Broad Thorsby, and the 3 Spears of Spyinghow, to come to me instantly; and let the scoutmaster, Hugh Bardon, attend me also. Adieu, my prince, till better times." Thus speaking, he left the apartment. "He goes to make my brother prisoner," said Prince John to De Bracy, "with as little touch of compunction as if it but concerned the liberty of a Saxon franklin. I trust he will observe our orders, and use our dear Richard's person with all due respect." De Bracy only answered by a smile. "By the light of Our Lady's brow," said Prince John, "our orders to him were most precise; though it may be you heard them not, as we stood together in the oriel window, most clear and positive was our charge that Richard's safety should be cared for, and woe to Waldemar's head if he transgress it." "I had better pass to his lodgings," said De Bracy, "and make him fully aware of your Grace's pleasure; for, as it quite escaped my ear, it may not perchance have reached that of Waldemar." "Nay, nay," said Prince John impatiently, "I promise thee he heard me; and besides, I have farther occupation for thee. Maurice, come hither, let me lean on thy shoulder." They walked a turn through the hall in this familiar posture, and Prince John, with an air of the most confidential intimacy, proceeded to say, "What thinkest thou of this Waldemar Fitzurse, my De Bracy? He trusts to be our Chancellor. Surely we will give pause, ere we give an office so high to one who shows evidently how little he reverences our blood, by his so readily undertaking this enterprise against Richard. Thou dost think, I warrant, that thou hast lost somewhat of our regard, by thy boldly declining this unpleasing task; but no, Maurice, I rather honour thee for thy virtuous constancy. There are things most necessary to be done, the perpetrator of which we neither love nor honour; and there may be refusals to serve us, which shall rather exalt in our estimation those who deny our request. The arrest of my unfortunate brother forms no such good title to the high office of Chancellor, as thy chivalrous and courageous denial establishes in thee to the truncheon of High Marshal. Think of this, De Bracy, and begone to thy charge." "Fickle tyrant!" muttered De Bracy, as he left the presence of the Prince. "Evil luck have they who trust thee! Thy Chancellor, indeed! He who hath the keeping of thy conscience shall have an easy charge, I trow. But High Marshal of England—that," he said, extending his arm, as if to grasp the baton of office, and assuming a loftier stride along the antechamber—"that is indeed a prize worth playing for." De Bracy had no sooner left the apartment than Prince John summoned an attendant. "Bid Hugh Bardon, our scoutmaster, come hither as soon as he shall have spoken with Waldemar Fitzurse." The scoutmaster arrived after a brief delay, during which John traversed the apartment with unequal and disordered steps. "Bardon," said he, "what did Waldemar desire of thee?" "Two resolute men, well acquainted with these northern wilds, and skilful in tracking the tread of man and horse." "And thou hast fitted him?" "Let your Grace never trust me else," answered the Master of the Spies. "One is from Hexamshire; he is wont to trace the Tynedale and the Teviotdale thieves, as the bloodhound follows the slot of a hurt deer. The other is Yorkshire bred, and has twanged his bowstring right oft in merry Sherwood. He knows each glade and dingle, copse and highwood, betwixt this and Richmond." "'Tis well," said the Prince. "Goes Waldemar forth with them?" "Instantly," said Bardon. "With what attendants?" asked John, carelessly. "Broad Thorsby goes with him, and Wetheral, whom they call, for his cruelty, Stephen Steelheart; and 3 northern men at arms that belonged to Ralph Middleton's gang, they are called the Spears of Spyinghow." "'Tis well," said Prince John; then added, after a moment's pause, "Bardon, it imports our service that thou keep a strict watch on Maurice de Bracy, so that he shall not observe it, however, and let us know of his motions from time to time, with whom he converses, what he proposeth. Fail not in this, as thou wilt be answerable." Hugh Bardon bowed and retired. "If Maurice betrays me," said Prince John, "if he betrays me, as his bearing leads me to fear, I will have his head, were Richard thundering at the gates of York." CHAPTer 35. Arouse the tiger of Hyrcanian deserts, strive with the half-starved lion for his prey. Lesser the risk, than rouse the slumbering fire of wild fanaticism. Anonymous. Our tale now returns to Isaac of York. Mounted upon a mule, the gift of the outlaw, with 2 tall yeomen to act as his guard and guides, the Jew had set out for the Preceptory of Templestowe, for the purpose of negotiating his daughter's redemption. The Preceptory was but a day's journey from the demolished castle of Torquilstone, and the Jew had hoped to reach it before nightfall. Accordingly, having dismissed his guides at the verge of the forest, and rewarded them with a piece of silver, he began to press on with such speed as his weariness permitted him to exert. But his strength failed him totally ere he had reached within 4 miles of the Temple Court. Racking pains shot along his back and through his limbs, and the excessive anguish which he felt at heart being now augmented by bodily suffering, he was rendered altogether incapable of proceeding farther than a small market town, where dwelt a Jewish rabbi of his tribe, eminent in the medical profession, and to whom Isaac was well known. Nathan ben Israel received his suffering countrymen with that kindness which the law prescribed, and which the Jews practiced to each other. He insisted on his betaking himself to repose, and used such remedies as were then in most repute to check the progress of the fever, which terror, fatigue, ill usage, and sorrow had brought upon the poor old Jew. On the morrow, when Isaac proposed to arise and pursue his journey, Nathan remonstrated against his purpose, both as his host and as his physician. It might cost him, he said, his life. But Isaac replied, that more than life and death depended upon his going that morning to Templestowe. "To Templestowe!" said his host, with surprise again felt his pulse, and then muttered to himself, "His fever is abated, yet seems his mind somewhat alienated and disturbed." "And why not to Templestowe?" answered his patient. "I grant thee, Nathan, that it is a dwelling of those to whom the despised children of the promise are a stumbling block and an abomination. Yet thou knowest that pressing affairs of traffic sometimes carry us among these bloodthirsty Nazarene soldiers, and that we visit the preceptories of the Templars, as well as the commanderies of the Knights Hospitallers, as they are called." "I know it well," said Nathan. "But wottest thou that Lucas de Beaumanoir, the chief of their order and whom they term Grand Master, is now himself at Templestowe?" "I know it not," said Isaac. "Our last letters from our brethren at Paris advised us that he was at that city, beseeching Philip for aid against the Sultan Saladin." "He hath since come to England, unexpected by his brethren," said Ben Israel, "and he cometh among them with a strong and outstretched arm to correct and to punish. His countenance is kindled in anger against those who have departed from the vow which they have made, and great is the fear of those sons of Belial. Thou must have heard of his name?" "It is well known unto me," said Isaac. "The Gentiles deliver this Lucas Beaumanoir as a man zealous to slaying for every point of the Nazarene law; and our brethren have termed him a fierce destroyer of the Saracens, and a cruel tyrant to the children of the promise." "And truly have they termed him," said Nathan the physician. "Other Templars may be moved from the purpose of their heart by pleasure, or bribed by promise of gold and silver; but Beaumanoir is of a different stamp, hating sensuality, despising treasure, and pressing forward to that which they call the crown of martyrdom. The God of Jacob speedily send it unto him, and unto them all. Specially hath this proud man extended his glove over the children of Judah, as holy David over Edom, holding the murder of a Jew to be an offering of as sweet savour as the death of a Saracen. Impious and false teachings has he said even of the virtues of our medicines, as if they were the devices of Satan. The Lord rebuke him." "Nevertheless," said Isaac, "I must present myself at Templestowe, though he hath made his face like unto a fiery furnace 7 times heated." He then explained to Nathan the pressing cause of his journey. The Rabbi listened with interest, and testified his sympathy after the fashion of his people, rending his clothes and saying, "Ah, my daughter! Ah, my daughter! Alas, for the beauty of Zion! Alas, for the captivity of Israel!" "Thou seest," said Isaac, "how it stands with me, and that I may not tarry. Peradventure the presence of this Lucas Beaumanoir, being the chief man over them, may turn Brian de Bois Guilbert from the ill which he doth meditate, and that he may deliver to me my beloved daughter Rebecca." "Go thou," said Nathan ben Israel, "and be wise, for wisdom availed Daniel in the den of lions into which he was cast; and may it go well with thee, even as thine heart wisheth. Yet, if thou canst, keep thee from the presence of the Grand Master, for to do foul scorn to our people is his morning and evening delight. It may be, if thou couldst speak with Bois Guilbert in private, thou shalt the better prevail with him; for men say that these accursed Nazarenes are not of one mind in the Preceptory. May their counsels be confounded and brought to shame. But do thou, brother, return to me as if it were to the house of thy father, and bring me word how it has sped with thee; and well do I hope thou wilt bring with thee Rebecca, even the scholar of the wise Miriam, whose cures the Gentiles slandered, as if they had been wrought by necromancy." Isaac accordingly bade his friend farewell, and about an hour's riding brought him before the Preceptory of Templestowe. This establishment of the Templars was seated amidst fair meadows and pastures, which the devotion of the former Preceptor had bestowed upon their order. It was strong and well fortified, a point never neglected by these knights, and which the disordered state of England rendered peculiarly necessary. 2 halberdiers, clad in black, guarded the drawbridge, and others, in the same sad livery, glided to and fro upon the walls with a funereal pace, resembling spectres more than soldiers. The inferior officers of the order were thus dressed, ever since their use of white garments, similar to those of the knights and esquires, had given rise to a combination of certain false brethren in the mountains of Palestine, terming themselves Templars, and bringing great dishonour on the order. A knight was now and then seen to cross the court in his long white cloak, his head depressed on his breast, and his arms folded. They passed each other, if they chanced to meet, with a slow, solemn, and mute greeting; for such was the rule of their order, quoting thereupon the holy texts, In many words thou shalt not avoid sin, and life and death are in the power of the tongue. In a word, the stern ascetic rigor of the temple discipline, which had been so long exchanged for prodigal and licentious indulgence, seemed at once to have revived at Templestowe under the severe eye of Lucas Beaumanoir. Isaac paused at the gate, to consider how he might seek entrance in the manner most likely to bespeak favour; for he was well aware, that to his unhappy race the reviving fanaticism of the Order was not less dangerous than their unprincipled licentiousness, and that his religion would be the object of hate and persecution in the one case, as his wealth would have exposed him in the other to the extortions of unrelenting oppression. Meantime Lucas Beaumanoir walked in a small garden belonging to the Preceptory, included within the precincts of its exterior fortification, and held sad and confidential communication with a brother of his order, who had come in his company from Palestine. The Grand Master was a man advanced in age, as was testified by his long grey beard, and the shaggy grey eyebrows overhanging eyes, of which, however, years had been unable to quench the fire. A formidable warrior, his thin and severe features retained the soldier's fierceness of expression; an ascetic bigot, they were no less marked by the emaciation of abstinence, and the spiritual pride of the self-satisfied devotee. Yet with these severer traits of physiognomy, there was mixed somewhat striking and noble, arising, doubtless, from the great part which his high office called upon him to act among monarchs and princes, and from the habitual exercise of supreme authority over the valiant and high-born knights, who were united by the rules of the Order. His stature was tall, and his gait, undepressed by age and toil, was erect and stately. His white mantle was shaped with severe regularity, according to the rule of St. Bernard himself, being composed of what was then called burrel cloth, exactly fitted to the size of the wearer, and bearing on the left shoulder the octangular cross peculiar to the Order, formed of red cloth. No vair or ermine decked this garment; but in respect of his age, the Grand Master, as permitted by the rules, wore his doublet lined and trimmed with the softest lambskin, dressed with the wool outwards, which was the nearest approach he could regularly make to the use of fur, then the greatest luxury of dress. In his hand he bore that singular abacus, or staff of office, with which Templars were usually represented, having at the upper end a round plate, on which was engraved the cross of the Order, inscribed within a circle or orle, as heralds term it. His companion, who attended on this great personage, had nearly the same dress in all respects, but his extreme deference towards his superior showed that no other equality subsisted between them. The Preceptor, for such he was in rank, walked not in a line with the Grand Master, but just so far behind that Beaumanoir could speak to him without turning round his head. "Conrade," said the Grand Master, "dear companion of my battles and toils, to thy faithful bosom alone I can confide my sorrows. To thee alone can I tell how oft, since I came to this kingdom, I have desired to be dissolved and to be with the just. Not one object in England hath met mine eye which it could rest upon with pleasure, save the tombs of our brethren beneath the massive roof of our Temple Church in yonder proud capital. O, valiant Robert de Ros, did I exclaim internally, as I gazed upon those good soldiers of the Cross, where they lie sculptured on their sepulchres. O, worthy William de Mareschal! Open your marble cells, and take to your repose a weary brother, who would rather strive with 100,000 pagans than witness the decay of our holy Order." "It is but true," answered Conrade Montfichet, "it is but too true; and the irregularities of our brethren in England are even more gross than those in France." "Because they are more wealthy," answered the Grand Master. "Bear with me, brother, although I should something vaunt myself. Thou knowest the life I have led, keeping each point of my order, striving with devils embodied and disembodied, striking down the roaring lion, who goeth about seeking whom he may devour, like a good knight and devout priest, wheresoever I met with him. Even as blessed Saint Bernard hath prescribed to us in the 45th capital of our rule, ut Leo semper feriatur. But by the holy temple, the zeal which hath devoured my substance and my life, yea, the very nerves and marrow of my bones, by that very holy temple I swear to thee, that save thyself and some few that still retain the ancient severity of our order, I look upon no brethren whom I can bring my soul to embrace under that holy name. What say our statutes, and how do our brethren observe them? They should wear no vain or worldly ornament, no crest upon their helmet, no gold upon stirrup or bridle bit. Yet who now go pranked about so proudly and so gaily as the poor soldiers of the temple? They are forbidden by our statutes to take one bird by means of another, to shoot beasts with bow or arblast, to halloo to a hunting horn, or to spur the horse after game. But now, at hunting and hawking, and each idle sport of wood and river, who so prompt as the Templars in all these fond vanities? They are forbidden to read, save what their superior permitted, or to listen to what is read, save such holy things as may be recited aloud during the hours of refaction. But lo! their ears are at the command of idle minstrels, and their eyes study empty romaunt's. They were commanded to extirpate magic and heresy. Lo! they are charged with studying the accursed cabalistical secrets of the Jews, and the magic of the Paynim Saracens. Simpleness of diet was prescribed to them, roots, pottage, gruels, eating flesh but thrice a week, because the accustomed feeding on flesh is a dishonorable corruption of the body. And behold, their tables groan under delicate fare! Their drink was to be water, and now to drink like a Templar is the boast of each jolly boon companion. This very garden, filled as it is with curious herbs and trees sent from the eastern climes, better becomes the harem of an unbelieving emir, than the plot which Christian monks should devote to raise their homely pot-herbs. And oh, Conrade, well it were that the relaxation of discipline stopped even here! Well thou knowest that we were forbidden to receive those devout women, who at the beginning were associated as sisters of our order, because, saith the 46th chapter, the ancient enemy hath, by female society, withdrawn many from the right path to paradise. Nay, in the last capital, being as it were the copestone which our blessed founder placed on the pure and undefiled doctrine which he had enjoined, we are prohibited from offering, even to our sisters and our mothers, the kiss of affection. Ut omnium mulierum fugiantur oscula. I shame to speak, I shame to think, of the corruptions which have rushed in upon us even like a flood. The souls of our pure founders, the souls of Hugh de Payenne and Godfrey de Saint Omer, and of the blessed seven who first joined in dedicating their lives to the service of the temple, are disturbed even in the enjoyment of paradise itself. I have seen them, Conrade, in the visions of the night. Their sainted eyes shed tears for the sins and follies of their brethren, and for the foul and shameful luxury in which they wallow. Beaumanoir, they say, thou slumberest, awake! There is a stain in the fabric of the temple, deep and foul as that left by the streaks of leprosy on the walls of the infected houses of old. The soldiers of the cross, who would shun the glance of a woman as the eye of a basilisk, live in open sin, not with the females of their own race only, but with the daughters of the accursed heathen, and more accursed Jew. Beaumanoir, thou sleepest. Up, and avenge our cause. Slay the sinners, male and female. Take to thee the brand of Phineas. The vision fled, Conrade, but as I awaked I could still hear the clank of their mail, and see the waving of their white mantles. And I will do according to their word. I will purify the fabric of the temple, and the unclean stones in which the plague is, I will remove and cast out of the building. Yet bethink thee, reverend father, said Montfichet, the stain hath become ingrained by time and consuetude. Let thy reformation be cautious, as it is just and wise. No, Montfichet, answered the stern old man, it must be sharp and sudden. The order is on the crisis of its fate. The sobriety, self-devotion, and piety of our predecessors made us powerful friends. Our presumption, our wealth, our luxury, have raised up against us mighty enemies. We must cast away these riches, which are a temptation to princes. We must lay down that presumption, which is an offense to them. We must reform that license of manners, which is a scandal to the whole Christian world. Or, mark my words, the order of the Temple will be utterly demolished, and the place thereof shall no more be known among the nations." "Now may God avert such a calamity!" said the Preceptor. "Amen," said the Grand Master, with solemnity, "but we must deserve his aid. I tell thee, Conrade, that neither the powers in heaven nor the powers on earth will longer endure the wickedness of this generation. My intelligence is sure. The ground on which our fabric is reared is already undermined, and each addition we make to the structure of our greatness will only sink it the sooner in the abyss. We must retrace our steps, and show ourselves the faithful champions of the cross, sacrificing to our calling, not alone our blood and our lives, not alone our lusts and our vices, but our ease, our comforts, and our natural affections, and act as men convinced that many a pleasure which may be lawful to others is forbidden to the vowed soldier of the Temple." At this moment a squire, clothed in a threadbare vestment, for the aspirants after this holy order wore during their novitiate the cast-off garments of the knights, entered the garden, and, bowing profoundly before the Grand Master, stood silent, awaiting his permission ere he presumed to tell his errand. "Is it not more seemly," said the Grand Master, "to see this Damian, clothed in the garments of Christian humility, thus appear with reverend silence before his superior, than but 2 days since, when the fond fool was decked in a painted coat, and jangling as pert and as proud as any popinjay? Speak, Damian, we permit thee. What is thine errand?" "A Jew stands without the gate, noble and reverend father," said the squire, "who prays to speak with brother Brian de Bois Guilbert." "Thou wert right to give me knowledge of it," said the Grand Master. "In our presence a preceptor is but as a common compeer of our order, who may not walk according to his own will, but to that of his master; even according to the text, 'In the hearing of the ear he hath obeyed me.' It imports us especially to know of this Bois Guilbert's proceedings," said he, turning to his companion. "Report speaks of him brave and valiant," said Conrade. "And truly is he so spoken of," said the Grand Master. "In our valour only are we not degenerated from our predecessors, the heroes of the cross. But brother Brian came into our order a moody and disappointed man, stirred, I doubt me, to take our vows and to renounce the world, not in sincerity of soul, but as one whom some touch of light discontent had driven into penitence. Since then he hath become an active and earnest agitator, a murmurer, and a machinator, and a leader amongst those who impugn our authority, not considering that the rule is given to the master even by the symbol of the staff and the rod, the staff to support the infirmities of the weak, the rod to correct the faults of delinquents. Damian," he continued, "lead the Jew to our presence." The squire departed with a profound reverence, and in a few minutes returned, marshalling in Isaac of York. No naked slave, ushered into the presence of some mighty prince, could approach his judgment seat with more profound reverence and terror than that which the Jew drew near to the presence of the Grand Master. When he had approached within the distance of 3 yards, Beaumanoir made a sign with his staff that he should come no farther. The Jew kneeled down on the earth which he kissed in token of reverence; then rising, stood before the Templars, his hands folded on his bosom, his head bowed on his breast, in all the submission of Oriental slavery. "Damian," said the Grand Master, "retire, and have a guard ready to await our sudden call; and suffer no one to enter the garden until we shall leave it." The squire bowed and retreated. "Jew," continued the haughty old man, "mark me, it suits not our condition to hold with thee long communication, nor do we waste words nor time upon any one. Wherefore be brief in thy answers to what questions I shall ask thee, and let thy words be of truth, for if thy tongue doubles with me, I will have it torn from thy misbelieving jaws." The Jew was about to reply, but the Grand Master went on. "Peace, unbeliever! Not a word in our presence, save in answer to our questions. What is thy business with our brother Brian de Bois Guilbert?" Isaac gasped with terror and uncertainty. To tell his tale might be interpreted into scandalizing the order; yet, unless he told it, what hope could he have of achieving his daughter's deliverance? Beaumanoir saw his mortal apprehension, and condescended to give him some assurance. "Fear nothing," he said, "for thy wretched person, Jew, so thou dealest uprightly in this matter. I demand again to know from thee thy business with Brian de Bois Guilbert?" "I am the bearer of a letter," stammered out the Jew, "so please your reverend valour, to that good knight, from Prior Aymer of the Abbey of Jorvaulx." "Said I not these were evil times, Conrade?" said the Master. "A Cistercian prior sends a letter to a soldier of the Temple, and can find no more fitting messenger than an unbelieving Jew. Give me the letter." The Jew, with trembling hands, undid the folds of his Armenian cap, in which he had deposited the Prior's tablets for the greater security, and was about to approach, with hand extended and body crouched, to place it within the reach of his grim interrogator. "Back, dog!" said the Grand Master. "I touch not misbelievers, save with the sword. Conrade, take thou the letter from the Jew, and give it to me." Beaumanoir, being thus possessed of the tablets, inspected the outside carefully, and then proceeded to undo the pack-thread which secured its folds. "Reverend father," said Conrade, interposing, though with much deference, "wilt thou break the seal?" "And will I not?" said Beaumanoir, with a frown. "Is it not written in the 42nd capital, De Lectione Literarum, that a Templar shall not receive a letter, no, not from his father, without communicating the same to the Grand Master, and reading it in his presence?" He then perused the letter in haste, with an expression of surprise and horror; read it over again more slowly; then holding it out to Conrade with one hand, and slightly striking it with the other, exclaimed, "Here is goodly stuff for one Christian man to write to another, and both members, and no inconsiderable members, of religious professions. When," said he solemnly, and looking upward, "wilt thou come with thy fanners to purge the threshing-floor?" Mont Fitchet took the letter from his superior, and was about to peruse it. "Read it aloud, Conrade," said the Grand Master, "and do thou," to Isaac, "attend to the purport of it, for we will question thee concerning it." Conrade read the letter, which was in these words: "Aymer, by divine grace, Prior of the Cistercian house of Saint Mary's of Jorvaulx, to Sir Brian de Bois Guilbert, a knight of the Holy Order of the Temple, wisheth health, with the bounties of King Bacchus and of my Lady Venus. Touching our present condition, dear brother, we are a captive in the hands of certain lawless and godless men, who have not feared to detain our person, and put us to ransom; whereby we have also learned of Front de Bœuf's misfortune, and that thou hast escaped with that fair Jewish sorceress, whose black eyes have bewitched thee. We are heartily rejoiced of thy safety. Nevertheless, we pray thee to be on thy guard in the matter of this second Witch of Endor; for we are privately assured that your great master, who careth not a bean for cherry cheeks and black eyes, comes from Normandy to diminish your mirth, and amend your misdoings. Wherefore we pray you heartily to beware, and to be found watching, even as the holy text hath it, Invenienter vigilantes. And the wealthy Jew her father, Isaac of York, having prayed of me letters in his behalf, I give him these, earnestly advising, and in a sort entreating, that you do hold the damsel to ransom, seeing he will pay you from his bags as much as may find 50 damsels upon safer terms, whereof I trust to have my part when we make merry together, as true brothers, not forgetting the wine-cup. For what saith the text, Vinum laetificat cor hominis, and again, Rex delectabitur pulchritudine tua. Till which merry meeting we shall wish you farewell. Given from this den of thieves, about the hour of matins, Aymer Prior S.M. Jorvaulxiensis. Postscriptum. Truly your golden chain hath not long abidden with me, and will now sustain, around the neck of an outlaw deer-stealer, the whistle wherewith he calleth on his hounds." "What sayest thou to this, Conrade?" said the Grand Master. "Den of thieves! and a fit residence is a den of thieves for such a prior. No wonder that the hand of God is upon us, and that in the Holy Land we lose place by place, foot by foot, before the infidels, when we have such churchmen as this Aymer. And what meaneth he, I trow, by this second witch of Endor? said he to his confidant, something apart. Conrade was better acquainted, perhaps by practice, with the jargon of gallantry than was his superior, and he expounded the passage which embarrassed the Grand Master, to be a sort of language used by worldly men, towards those whom they loved par amours, but the explanation did not satisfy the bigoted Beaumanoir. "There is more in it than thou dost guess, Conrade. Thy simplicity is no match for this deep abyss of wickedness. This Rebecca of York was a pupil of that Miriam of whom thou hast heard. Thou shalt hear the Jew own it even now." Then turning to Isaac, he said aloud, "Thy daughter, then, is a prisoner with Brian de Bois Guilbert?" "Ay, reverend valorous sir," stammered poor Isaac, "and whatever ransom a poor man may pay for her deliverance—" "Peace!" said the Grand Master. "This thy daughter hath practised the art of healing, hath she not?" "Ay, gracious sir," answered the Jew with more confidence, "and knight and yeoman, squire and vassal, may bless the goodly gift which Heaven hath assigned to her. Many a one can testify that she hath recovered them by her art, when every other human aid hath proved vain; but the blessing of the God of Jacob was upon her." Beaumanoir turned to Mont Fitchet with a grim smile. "See, brother," he said, "the deceptions of the devouring enemy. Behold the baits with which he fishes for souls, giving a poor space of earthly life in exchange for eternal happiness hereafter. Well said our blessed Rule, Semper percutiatur leo vorans. Up on the lion, down with the destroyer!" said he, shaking aloft his mystic abacus, as if in defiance of the powers of darkness. "Thy daughter worketh the cures, I doubt not," thus he went on to address the Jew, "by words and sighs, and periapts, and other cabalistical mysteries." "Nay, reverend and brave knight," answered Isaac, "but in chief measure by a balsam of marvellous virtue." "Where had she that secret?" said Beaumanoir. "It was delivered to her," answered Isaac, reluctantly, "by Miriam, a sage matron of our tribe." "Ah, false Jew!" said the Grand Master. "Was it not from that same witch Miriam, the abomination of whose enchantments have been heard of throughout every Christian land?" exclaimed the Grand Master, crossing himself. "Her body was burnt at a stake, and her ashes were scattered to the four winds. And so be it with me and mine order, if I do not as much to her pupil, and more also. I will teach her to throw a spell and incantation over the soldiers of the blessed temple. There, Damian, spurn this Jew from the gate. Shoot him dead if he oppose or turn again. With his daughter we will deal as the Christian law and our own high office warrant." Poor Isaac was hurried off accordingly, and expelled from the preceptory, all his entreaties, and even his offers, unheard and disregarded. He could do not better than return to the house of the Rabbi, and endeavor, through his means, to learn how his daughter was to be disposed of. He had hitherto feared for her honor, he was now to tremble for her life. Meanwhile the Grand Master ordered to his presence the Preceptor of Templestowe. Chapter
36. Say not my art is fraud. All live by seeming. The beggar begs with it, and the gay courtier gains land and title, rank and rule by seeming. The clergy scorn it not, and the bold soldier will eke it out with his service. All admit it, all practice it, and he who is content with showing what he is shall have small credit, in church or camp or state. So wags the world. Old Play. Albert Malvoisin, President, or in the language of the order, Preceptor, of the establishment of Templestowe, was brother to that Philip Malvoisin, who had been already occasionally mentioned in this history, and was, like that baron, in close league with Brian de Bois Guilbert. Amongst dissolute and unprincipled men, of whom the Temple order included but too many, Albert of Templestowe might be distinguished, but with this difference from the audacious Bois Guilbert, that he knew how to throw over his vices and his ambition the veil of hypocrisy, and to assume in his exterior the fanaticism which he internally despised. Had not the arrival of the Grand Master been so unexpectedly sudden, he would have seen nothing at Templestowe which might have appeared to argue any relaxation of discipline. And, even although surprised, and to a certain extent detected, Albert Malvoisin listened with such respect and apparent contrition to the rebuke of his superior, and made such haste to reform the particulars he censured, succeeded, in fine, so well in giving an air of aesthetic devotion to a family which had been lately devoted to license and pleasure, that Lucas Beaumanoir began to entertain a higher opinion of the preceptor's morals than the first appearance of the establishment had inclined him to adopt. But these favourable sentiments on the part of the Grand Master were greatly shaken by the intelligence that Albert had received within house of religion the Jewish captive, and, as was to be feared, the paramour of a brother of the order, and when Albert appeared before him, he was regarded with unwonted sternness.
"There is in this mansion, dedicated to the purpose of the Holy Order of the Temple," said the Grand Master, in a severe tone, "a Jewish woman, brought hither by a brother of religion, by your connivance, Sir Preceptor."
Albert Malvoisin was overwhelmed with confusion, for the unfortunate Rebecca had been confined in a remote and secret part of the building, and every precaution used to prevent her residence there from being known. He read in the looks of Beaumanoir ruin to Bois Guilbert, and to himself, unless he should be able to avert the impending storm.
"Why are you mute?"
continued the Grand Master.
"Is it permitted for me to reply?"
answered the Preceptor, in a tone of the deepest humility, although by the question he was only meant to gain an instant's space for arranging his ideas.
"Speak, you are permitted,"
said the Grand Master.
"Speak, and say, knowest thou the capital of our holy rule? De Camultanibus Temple in sancta civitate quicam miserrimus versantur proptur oblectationem carnus?"
"Surely, most reverend father," answered the Preceptor, "I have not risen to this office in the order, being ignorant of one of its most important prohibitions."
"How comes it, then, I demand of thee once more, that thou hast suffered a brother to bring a paramour, and that paramour a Jewish sorceress, into this holy place, to the stain and pollution thereof?"
"A Jewish sorceress!" echoed Albert Malvoisin. "Good angels guard us!"
"Ay, brother, a Jewish sorceress," said the Grand Master sternly. "I have said it. Darest thou deny that this Rebecca, the daughter of that wretched usurer Isaac of York, and the pupil of the foul witch Miriam, is now, shame to be thought or spoken, lodged within this thy preceptory?"
"Your wisdom, reverend father," answered the Preceptor, "hath rolled away the darkness from my understanding.
Much did I wonder that so good a knight as Brian de Bois Guilbert seemed so fondly besotted on the charms of this female, whom I received into this house merely to place a bar betwixt their growing intimacy, which else might have been cemented at the expense of the fall of our valiant and religious brother."
"Hath nothing, then, as yet, passed betwixt them in breach of his vow?"
demanded the Grand Master. "What, under this roof?" said the Preceptor, crossing himself. "Saint Magdalene and the 10,000 virgins forbid! No, if I have sinned in receiving her here, it was in the erring thought that I might thus break off our brother's besotted devotion to this Jewess, which seemed to me so wild and unnatural, that I could not but ascribe it to some touch of insanity, more to be cured by pity than reproof. But since your reverend wisdom hath discovered this Jewish queen to be a sorceress, perchance it may account fully for his enamoured folly."
"It doth," said Beaumanoir. "See, brother Conrad, the peril of yielding to the first devices and blandishments of Satan.
We look upon woman only to gratify the lust of the eye, and to take pleasure in what men call her beauty. And the ancient enemy, the devouring lion, obtains power over us, to complete by talisman and spell, a work which was begun by idleness and folly. It may be that our brother Bois Guilbert does in this matter deserve rather pity than severe chastisement, rather the support of the staff, than the strokes of the rod, and that our admonitions and prayers may turn him from his folly, and restore him to his brethren." "It would be pity," said Conrad Montfichet, "to lose to the Order one of its best lances, when that holy community most requires the aid of its sons. 300 Saracens has this Brian de Bois Guilbert slain with his own hand." "The blood of these accursed dogs," said the Grand Master, "shall be a sweet and acceptable offering to the saints and angels whom they despise and blaspheme. And with their aid we will counteract the spells and charms with which our brother is entwined as in a net. He shall burst the bands of this Delilah, as Samson burst the 2 new cords with which the Philistines had bound him, and shall slaughter the infidels, even heaps upon heaps. But concerning this foul witch, who hath flung her enchantments over a brother of the Holy Temple, assuredly she shall die the death."
"But the laws of England," said the Preceptor, who, though delighted that the Grand Master's resentment, thus fortunately averted from himself and Bois Guilbert, had taken another direction, began now to fear he was carrying it too far.
"The laws of England," interrupted Beaumanoir, "permit and enjoin each judge to execute justice within his own jurisdiction. The most petty baron may arrest, try, and condemn a witch found within his own domain. And shall that power be denied to the Grand Master of the Temple within a preceptory of his order? No! We will judge and condemn. The witch shall be taken out of the land, and the wickedness thereof shall be forgiven. Prepare the castle hall for the trial of the sorceress."
Albert Malvoisin bowed and retired, not to give directions for preparing the hall, but to seek out Brian de Bois Guilbert, and to communicate to him how matters were likely to terminate. It was not long ere he found him, foaming with indignation at a repulse he had anew sustained from the fair Jewess.
"The unthinking," he said, "the ungrateful, to scorn him who, amidst blood and flames, would have saved her life at the risk of his own. By heaven, Malvoisin, I abode roof and rafters crackled and crashed around me. I was the butt of 100 arrows. They rattled on mine armour like hailstones against a lattice casement. And the only use I made of my shield was for her protection. This did I endure for her. And now the self-willed girl upbraids me that I did not leave her to perish, and refuses me not only the slightest proof of gratitude, but even the most distant hope that ever she will be brought to grant any. The devil that possessed her race with obstinacy has concentrated its full force in her single person."
"The devil," said the Preceptor, "I think possessed you both. How oft have I preached to you caution, if not continence? Did I not tell you that there were enough willing Christian damsels to be met with, who would think it sin to refuse so brave a knight? Le don de la mercy, and you must needs anchor your affection on a wilful, obstinate Jewess. By the mass, I think old Lucas Beaumanoir guessed right, when he maintains she hath cast a spell over you." "Lucas Beaumanoir?" said Bois Guilbert reproachfully. "Are these your precautions, Malvoisin? Hast thou suffered the dotard to learn that Rebecca is in the preceptory?" "How could I help it?" said the Preceptor. "I neglected nothing that could keep secret your mystery, but it is betrayed, and whether by the devil or no, the devil only can tell. But I have turned the matter as I could. You are safe if you renounce Rebecca. You are pitied, the victim of magical delusion. She is a sorceress, and must suffer as such."
"She shall not, by heaven," said Bois Guilbert.
"By heaven she must and will," said Malvoisin.
Neither you nor no one else can save her. Lucas Beaumanoir has settled that the death of a Jewess will be a sin offering sufficient to atone for all the amorous indulgences of the Knights Templars. And thou knowest he hath both the power and will to execute so reasonable and pious a purpose. Will future ages believe that such stupid bigotry ever existed? Said Bois Guilbert, striding up and down the apartment. What they may believe I know not, said Malvoisin, calmly. But I know well that in this our day, clergy and laymen, take 99 to the 100, will cry Amen to the Grand Master's sentence. I have it, said Bois Guilbert. Albert, thou art my friend. Thou must connive at her escape, Malvoisin, and I will transport her to some place of greater security and secrecy. I cannot, if I would, replied the Preceptor. The mansion is filled with the attendants of the Grand Master, and others who are devoted to him, and to be frank with you, brother, I would not embark with you in this matter, even if I could hope to bring my bark to haven. I have risked enough already for your sake. I have no mind to encounter a sentence of degradation, or even to lose my preceptory, for the sake of a painted piece of Jewish flesh and blood. And you, if you will be guided by my counsel, will give up this wild goose chase, and fly your hawk at some other game. Think, Bois Guilbert, thy present rank, thy future honours all depend on the place in the order. Shouldst thou adhere perversely to thy passion for this Rebecca, thou wilt give Beaumanoir the power of expelling thee, and he will not neglect it. He is jealous of the truncheon which he holds in his trembling gripe, and he knows thou stretchest thy bold hand towards it. Doubt not he will ruin thee, if thou affordest him a pretext so fair as thy protection of a Jewish sorceress. Give him his scope in this matter, for thou canst not control him. When the staff is in thine own firm grasp, thou mayest caress the daughters of Judah, or burn them as thou best suit thine own humour. Malvoisin, said Bois Guilbert, thou art a cold-blooded friend, said the Preceptor, hastening to fill up the blank, in which Bois Guilbert would probably have placed a worse word. A cold-blooded friend I am, and therefore more fit to give thee advice. I tell thee once more that thou canst not save Rebecca. I tell thee once more, thou canst but perish with her. Go hie thee to the Grand Master, throw thyself at his feet, and tell him— Not at his feet, by heaven, but to the dotard's very beard will I say— Say to him then, to his beard, continued Malvoisin coolly, that you love the captive Jewess to distraction, and the more thou dost enlarge on thy passion, the greater will be his haste to end it by the death of the fair enchantress, while thou, taken in flagrant derelict by the avowal of a crime contrary to thine oath, canst hope no aid of thy brethren, and must exchange all thy brilliant visions of ambition and power, to lift perhaps a mercenary spear in some of the petty quarrels between Flanders and Burgundy. Thou speakest the truth, Malvoisin, said Brian de Bois Guilbert, after a moment's reflection. I will give the hoary bigot no advantage over me, and for Rebecca she hath not merited at my hand that I should expose rank and honour for her sake. I will cast her off. Yes, I will leave her to her fate, unless— Qualify not thy wise and necessary resolution, said Malvoisin. Women are but the toys which must amuse our lighter hours. Ambition is a serious business of life. Perish 1,000 but frail baubles as this Jewess, before thy manly step pause in the brilliant career that lies stretched before thee. For the present we part. Nor must we be seen to hold close conversation. I must order the hall for his judgment seat. What? Said Bois Guilbert, so soon? Ay, replied the Preceptor. Trial moves rapidly on when the judge has determined the sentence beforehand. Rebecca, said Bois Guilbert, when he was left alone, thou art like to cost me dear. Why cannot I abandon thee to thy fate, as this calm hypocrite recommends? One effort will I make to save thee. But beware of ingratitude, For if I am again repulsed, my vengeance shall equal my love. The life and honour of Bois Guilbert must not be hazarded, where contempt and reproaches are his only reward." The Preceptor had hardly given the necessary orders, when he was joined by Conrade Montfichet, who acquainted him with the Grand Master's resolution to bring the Jewess to instant trial for sorcery. "It is surely a dream," said the Preceptor. "We have many Jewish physicians. We call them not wizards, though they work wonderful cures." "The Grand Master thinks otherwise," said Montfichet. "And Albert, I would be upright with thee, wizard or not, if it were better that this miserable damsel die, than that Brian de Bois Guilbert should be lost to the Order, or the Order divided by internal dissension. Thou knowest his high rank, his fame in arms, thou knowest the zeal with which many of our brethren regard him. But all this will not avail him with our Grand Master, should he consider Brian as the accomplice, not the victim, of this Jewess. Were the souls of the 12 tribes in a single body, it were better she suffered alone, than that Brian Guilbert be partner in her destruction." "I have been working with him even now to abandon her," said Malvoisin. "But still, are there grounds enough to condemn this Rebecca for sorcery? Will not the Grand Master change his mind when he sees that the proofs are so weak?" "They must be strengthened, Albert," replied Montfichet. "They must be strengthened. Dost thou understand me?" "I do," said the Preceptor. "Nor do I scruple to do aught for advancement of the Order. There is little time to find engines fitting." "Malvoisin, they must be found," said Conrade. "Well will it advantage both Order and thee. This Templestowe is a poor preceptory. That of Maison Dieu, it is double its value. Thou knowest my interest with our old chief. Find those who can carry this matter through, and thou art preceptor of Maison Dieu in the fertile Kent. How sayest thou?" "There is," replied Malvoisin, "among those who came hither with Bois Guilbert, 2 fellows whom I well know. Servants they were to my brother Philip de Malvoisin, and passed from his service to that of Front de Bœuf. It may be they know something of the witcheries of this woman. Away, seek them out instantly, and hark thee, if a byzant or 2 will sharpen their memory, let them not be wanting." "They would swear the mother that bore them a sorceress for a Zecchin," said the Preceptor. "Away then," said Montfichet. "At noon the affair will proceed. I have not seen our senior in such earnest preparation since he condemned to the stake Hamet Al-Fagi, a convert who relapsed to the Moslem faith." The ponderous castle bell had tolled at the point of noon, when Rebecca heard a trampling of feet upon the private stair which led to her place of confinement. The noise announced the arrival of several persons, and the circumstance rather gave her joy, for she was more afraid of the solitary visits of the fierce and passionate Bois Guilbert than of any evil that could befall her besides. The door of the chamber was unlocked, and Conrade and Preceptor Malvoisin entered, attended by 4 warders clothed in black, and bearing halberds. "Daughter of an accursed race," said the Preceptor, "arise and follow us." "Whither?" said Rebecca, "and for what purpose?" "Damsel," answered Conrade, "it is not for thee to question, but to obey. Nevertheless, be it known to thee, that thou art to be brought before the tribunal of the Grand Master of our Holy Order, there to answer for thine offences." "May the God of Abraham be praised!" said Rebecca, folding her hands devoutly. "The name of a judge, though an unwilling enemy to my people, is to me as the name of a protector. Most willingly do I follow thee. Permit me only to wrap my veil about my head." They descended the stair with slow and solemn step, traversed a long gallery, and by a pair of folding doors placed at the end, entered the great hall in which the Grand Master had for the time established his court of justice. The lower part of this ample apartment was filled with squires and yeomen, who made way not without some difficulty for Rebecca, attended by the Preceptor and Montfichet, and followed by the guard of halberdiers, to move forward to the seat appointed for her. As she passed through the crowd, her arms folded and her head depressed, a scrap of paper was thrust into her hand, which she received almost unconsciously, and continued to hold without examining its contents. The assurance that she possessed some friend in this awful assembly gave her courage to look around, and to mark into whose presence she had been conducted. She gazed, accordingly, upon the scene, which we shall endeavour to describe in the next chapter. End of chapter 36.